Monday, September 14th, 2015, was remembered by 16-year-old Nolan Buchanan as the best day of his life. The day before, he had spent Sunday with his girlfriend, a traditional morning mass with his girlfriend's family, followed by a get-together with friends and a wonderfully romantic evening. Waking up on Monday morning next to his favorite girl, the teenager felt like a free, successful, and influential businessman before whom the whole world was open. After all, he was now the owner of Buchanan Construction. The young man was going to inherit cars, a house, land, monetary assets, and made plans for how he would manage the family business alone, and certainly do it better than his father, who brought the company to bankruptcy. It would seem that what could go wrong? Already on October 1st, 2015, Nolan Keith Buchanan was arrested at Bonita High School in Bonita, California, by the El Dorado County Sheriff's Office. Nolan was incarcerated at the Juvenile Treatment Center, JTC, in South Lake Tahoe until June 13, 2018, when an El Dorado County jury of 7 men and 5 women found Buchanan guilty of 3 charges. The jury took just 2 hours to reach a verdict. The young man was sentenced to 150 years in prison with the possibility of parole from the 25th year of his sentence. This is how his plan to take over the family business ended. Neighbors and classmates spoke of Nolan as a model kid and a good student. As far as I know, he was a good kid. Anita High School student Campbell Ruxton would later say in an interview, "He always cared about school. He seemed very kind. He was very nice. I'm even surprised he was arrested." But what really happened in the Buchanan family? Let's break down this horrific case in detail. Molly first met Adam Buchanan when she came to apply for a job at his firm as an office manager. By the time they met, Adam was already divorced and raising his son Nolan from a previous marriage on his own. The cheerful, sociable, and cheerful blonde immediately attracted the attention of the owner of the company. The interest was mutual. Molly fell in love, started a romance that turned into a serious relationship and her move to Adam. Molly dreamed of a real, loving, friendly family and tried to build a wonderful relationship with her stepson. Soon, she became pregnant. Gavin was born. People who knew the Buchanans claimed that they were a fairly close-knit family of 4. The head of the family, who owned a construction company, earned enough to ensure a comfortable life, and the family even purchased vacation property in El Dorado County, California. A small cabin sat on 19 acres in Greenwood, a rustic cabin with no electricity, water, sewer, or gas. Adam, who worked in construction, took an active role in remodeling the house, and the family began to visit there often. On September 13, 2015 at 10 a.m., members of the Garden Valley Fire Department responded to a wildfire in Greenwood Township in western El Dorado County on Highway 193 between Cool and Georgetown. Upon arrival, they found the fire had destroyed 10 acres of the property. A cabin located on the property was still smoldering but had burned to the ground. The fire department personnel observed charred remains in the ashes. The scene of the fire was not touched, and at 11 a.m., firefighters called the El Dorado County Sheriff's Office. No one had yet realized what was at the scene. Firefighters were almost certain that the victim of the wildfire was a pet trapped in the house. The arriving coroner was faced with a daunting task. The remains of the house were still smoldering, and there was no way to examine the inside of the house. They had to wait for the flames to finally die down and for the temperature to drop slightly. As the coroner examined the house, he smelled the sweet odor of burnt flesh and later discovered a human skull and a burned chest. It appeared that the tragedy had claimed someone's life. The officer requested backup. Officers from the sheriff's office arrived and conducted a thorough examination of the scene. The conclusion was obvious. The small, secluded, and remote cabin was not the primary residence of its owners. Rather, it was most likely a country cabin where people came to vacation. A Dodge truck and trailer were found on the property adjacent to the cabin. It was possible to run the license plates and find out who the car belonged to. The owner may have been the victim of the wildfire. It didn't take long to find out that the vehicle and trailer belonged to Buchanan Construction, a company owned by a man named Adam Buchanan. The man in question lived 160 miles from the scene of the accident, about 3 hours away in Bonita, California. This information confirmed the assumption of the police, who decided that the house was just a country residence for those who vacation here from the hustle and bustle of the city. It remained to be seen who was inside, Mr. Buchanan himself or someone else. The name of the owner of the company gave the detectives their first clue with which they began their investigation. The Bonita police officers were tasked with checking to see if all of Buchanan's family members were well and at home. They went to the correct address and were soon in the Buchanan's driveway, where they noticed a white Ford pickup truck. At a knock on the door, Adam's 16-year-old son from his first marriage came out. He greeted the uniformed officers with surprise and asked what brought them to him. The officers decided to first find out who was in the house so as not to frighten the household. Perhaps the company car had been taken by someone from the company and not the owner himself. Nolan Buchanan said his father, Adam, had gone away for the weekend to his country estate 160 miles away, with Molly and their 8-year-old son Gavin, and they were due back in the evening. According to him, his father had left him to look after the house. Investigators did not yet have sufficient reason to believe the remains in the cabin were those of the Buchanans, but the information received and the discovery of the remains, believed to be those of 2 people by the evening of September 13th, was enough to report the family missing in the El Dorado County fire. The next day, September 14th, El Dorado County Police went to Nolan's home to talk to him more thoroughly and try to figure out whose lives the fire had claimed. Officers were met by Adam's parents, Howard and Susan Buchanan. They said that their son, the owner of the burned-out cabin, did his own home repairs and therefore traveled there very often. The parents were very concerned as they had not been able to contact their son or daughter-in-law until now. From the story, the officers learned that the house is connected to generators, but at the time of the tragedy, it had no electricity. There were, however, gas cylinders inside. This gave 2 theories. The fire could have been either accidental or intentional. By September 15th, the fire scene had cooled down, and investigators were finally able to collect evidence, including debris from a nearby fire pit. According to Denton James Peterson of the El Dorado County Sheriff's Office, new remains were discovered that changed the direction of the case. Police found a piece of skull with a bullet hole. At that point, we all realized that there was actually a homicide. This was not an accidental fire, reported the sheriff. The remains were collected and sent for forensic DNA testing. In the first set of remains, the bullet was lodged in the victim's thigh. The skull with the bullet hole, judging by its size, belonged to a child. The version of a fatal accident dropped by itself. The version of murder came to the forefront. No one now doubted that the fire was a means of destroying the traces of the crime. It remained to find out under what circumstances the crime had taken place. Was it a burglary that had gone wrong? Or had the family taken their lives deliberately? But then by whom and why? Or could the crime be related to Buchanan Construction, a company where Adam Buchanan was president and chief operating officer, and someone harbored a grudge against him due to a working relationship? Initially, investigators focused specifically on the latter theory. They also looked into Molly's life to determine if she had any enemies capable of the crime. Once those lines of inquiry stalled, officers turned their attention to problems in Molly and Adam's marriage. There proved to be plenty of them. Investigators learned that over time, Molly and Adam's relationship began to deteriorate, and at the time of the crime, they had been sleeping apart for quite some time. A diary was found in which Molly described abuse from Adam. Witnesses interviewed described rough treatment and abuse. According to them, Adam was rude not only to Molly but also to the children. Molly's mother, Susie Slankard, admitted to investigators, "There were times when I was afraid they would kill each other in one of their arguments." Molly did not sever her relationship with Adam but would periodically take her son and leave to go to her parents' house and return a few days later until the next fight. It also turned out that the couple liked to hunt in the area where their country house was located. Since everyone was armed, the investigators assumed that during another quarrel, one of the spouses grabbed a gun and shot. And when he realized what he had done, he took his own life. However, there was an inconsistency. If the tragedy happened because of a conflict between husband and wife, it means that near the remains of one of them must necessarily be the instrument of the crime, which, however, was not. Investigators speculated that the weapon may have been damaged in the fire and may not have looked as obvious as expected. Over the course of 5 days, forensic team members took turns removing ashes from the home. The search was conducted with surgical thoroughness but did not yield the expected result. No weapons were found in the house. By this time, the data from the forensic examination came in. The examination confirmed that the DNA of the bodies belonged to Adam Buchanan, Molly McAfee, and their 8-year-old son. All 3 victims had suffered gunshot wounds before the fire, and the angle of the bullet wounds ruled out the version that someone took their own life. The lack of firearms meant that someone else was in the house, a 4th person who shot the Buchanans, and the investigation had to start over. Police had no choice but to turn to the 16-year-old son of the deceased. Nolan told officers that the family drove away in an old Dodge truck. According to the son, his father decided to use the company vehicle rather than his personal Ford, which was parked in the driveway because he had loaded the truck and trailer with rocks that he was going to use to decorate the area near his country cabin. It was this truck that police found near the burn structure. When asked why Nolan did not go on vacation with his relatives, the young man, as in the first interview, said that he had a duty to look after the house and garden during the absence of his father and stepmother. Nolan also said that they had a neighbor growing forbidden grass on the edge of the Buchanan property, which caused his father to have frequent arguments with this neighbor, demanding that he stop planting the grass and threatening to go to the police. Talking about the family business, Nolan told of the company's financial difficulties. Things were not going well. The company was undergoing downsizing, and the number of employees was down to 5. From what his father said, the debts associated with the business were increasing rapidly. So now the investigation had a lot of useful information, and the detectives had a suspect, a neighbor, especially since in that area, violent crime was often linked to the cultivation of illegal herbs. Detectives felt that the threat of going to the police could have led to the murder of Buchanan and his family. The problem was, no one had any idea which neighbor they were talking about. Investigators canvassed the neighborhood, interviewing all the homeowners in a row. The tactic was successful. They found a man who confirmed the story of a quarrel with Adam over growing a forbidden crop. But according to him, after a sharp conversation, the conflict was over. The neighbor had an alibi, and another version turned out to be untenable. What remained to be dealt with was the financial crisis that had hit the family's business. On September 18th, the police visited Adam's company and interviewed the employees. Nolan's words were true. The company was in a sorry state. It was threatened with bankruptcy as the amount of debts exceeded $30,000. Because of this, some employees were fired. It turned out that some of the former employees were extremely dissatisfied with the reduction and therefore could be involved in the crime. And that's where investigators got lucky. Over the weekend, the local high school organized a community cleanup day. The students were clearing debris from a business park just a mile from Adam's construction company. It was there on September 19th that a small purse with a wallet and identification cards belonging to Molly McAfee and Adam Buchanan was found under one of the bushes. A .22 caliber rifle was lying nearby. Detectives immediately went to the scene of the discovery. The county sheriff's office made a new assumption. The perpetrator had massacred the Buchanan family with the found rifle and, covering his tracks, had taken their documents from the crime scene. The discovery was important because it meant that someone had traveled all the way to Greenwood to kill the family and then returned to Bonita to dispose of the bag and murder weapon. It appeared to be a Bonita resident. The proximity of the evidence found to the location of Buchanan construction strengthened the theory that the boss was massacred by one of the disgruntled employees. Detectives sent the firearm and the bag of documents for examination, requesting a warrant to inspect the company's records and premises. Here, the investigators got lucky a second time. During the search, they gained access to a video surveillance camera installed on the firm's premises. By happy coincidence, the lens of the camera was directed not at the company's territory, but at the center of the parking lot. After this discovery, the case was just days away from being solved. Since it was already known that the family had gone out of town on Friday, investigators reviewed Friday's footage and were surprised to find that Adam had attached a trailer filled with rocks to a Ford F-150, not a Dodge truck as Nolan had told them. Detectives realized that the young man had deliberately manipulated the investigation. If the white Ford had towed the rock trailer to the cabin, then someone must have driven it back and parked it in the driveway of the Buchanan family home. Investigators re-interviewed Nolan, trying to keep him safe while getting as many details as possible. Nolan again recounted his weekend, where he had been and who he had seen. Only this time they asked him what movie they had seen at the cinema, how he had paid for the shopping at the mall, and how he had paid for dessert on a date. The unsuspecting Nolan answered with his father's credit card. The officers then applied for a warrant to search Buchanan's home in Bonita, search the vehicles, and check financial records. The Ford automobile was still parked in the driveway. It was closely inspected, and they noticed reddish soil sticking to the wheels, similar to that in Greenwood. If the Ford had been used for a trip last weekend or earlier, traces of soil might have remained, but they would not have been as obvious. Unfortunately, the fire had destroyed the wheel tread marks near the country house, but the dirt buildup indicated that the car had probably been to Greenwood recently. Detectives tracked the bank card payments and found that Adam Buchanan had used his credit card on Friday, September 11th, at fast food chain Taco Bell on his way to Greenwood. Nolan, on the other hand, claimed he stayed home, did not go with his parents, and had the credit card in his possession. Detectives went to the diner and checked the security cameras. They saw exactly what they expected, a white Ford instead of a truck. When detectives searched the Ford, they found a Taco Bell receipt dated September 11th that included not 3 but 4 drinks. Evidence collected at the scene of the fire similarly pointed to 4 drink cups. So Nolan was in the car. The next credit card transaction took place on Saturday, September 12th, at the Valencia Club Bar in Penryn, about 30 minutes away from the cabin. Adam's parents had previously told detectives about the bar. They said their son and daughter-in-law liked to drop in there after renovations to the cabin. Security cameras recorded the time the couple left the bar, and traffic cameras on the highway helped track the couple's route. A Ford F-150 headed toward the Buchanan cabin around 2:30 a.m. on the day of the fire, and at 3:30 a.m. drove in the opposite direction. In the first instance, the camera captured Adam and Molly in the vehicle, and in the second, only Nolan. A few hours later, on Sunday morning, September 13th, Adam's credit card was used to pay at 3 of Bonita's establishments: Starbucks, McDonald's, and a gas station. The bank confirmed to investigators that Buchanan had only 1 bank card. The facts contradicted Nolan's stories. By this time, forensic results had come back. Nolan's fingerprints were found on the gun. He was arrested right in the middle of a high school class. Nolan Buchanan pleaded not guilty to the charges against him. He attempted to distort the story and claimed that it was his father who shot the family, after which he pointed a rifle at him, and he, defending himself, took the weapon away, accidentally shooting his father. Nolan insisted it was self-defense, attributing the fire and subsequent lie to a state of panic and extreme fright. That's why he took gasoline and set the house on fire, to make it look like nothing had happened there. The defense continually focused the jury's attention on Adam's abuse of his own son and other family members. The medical examiner questioned the verdict because the bullet wound mark on a piece of Gavin's skull was consistent with a shot fired at nearly a 90-degree angle. Nolan, on the other hand, claimed that his and his brother's beds were next to each other, and they were simultaneously awakened by the noise and screaming. It was at the moment of awakening that Nolan allegedly saw someone enter the bedroom and shoot Gavin. The shooter then pointed the rifle at him, and Nolan miraculously managed to push the attacker away. Under this scenario, the shot would have been fired at about a 45-degree angle, which was inconsistent with forensic evidence. The prosecution came to believe that Nolan shot his brother when they were alone in the house while their parents spent time at a bar. After waiting for his father and stepmother to return, Nolan shot them as well. Judging by where the bodies were found, Adam was killed first, followed by Molly. Nolan then took the rifle, his parents' papers, doused the bodies with gasoline, and set the house on fire. Then he went home, met his girlfriend, and spent the day with her, creating an alibi for himself. On July 13, 2018, a jury found Nolan guilty of 3 counts of first-degree murder. As a result, he was sentenced to 150 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years. Judge Kingsbury, in announcing the sentence, reflected on the verbal and physical abuse Nolan faced, on the testimony that Nolan massacred his brother because he didn't want him to go through the same horror or be forced to live with what his father had already managed to do to him. But as she did, she also listed facts about the premeditation of the crime and subsequent arson, the creation of alibis, and the plans to run the family business that Nolan had voiced to family members. The judge cited a failure to follow rules and deviant behavior noted by staff at the South Lake Tahoe Juvenile Treatment Center, where Nolan went after his arrest. "Everyone has the opportunity to change," Judge Kingsbury told Nolan. "I hope you will do everything in your power to do so. If you behave well, you will have a chance to get out on parole in 25 years under the Senate bill and Supreme Court rulings. It's up to you whether you take that chance or not." Nolan continues to insist he is innocent. If he ever gets out on parole, he will have to pay huge compensation to the victims. The amount of the payout is unknown at this time. "15-year-old Kaye Hayward lived with her family in a village called Measham in Leicestershire, England. Kaye was part of a big family and was close to all her brothers and sisters. Her mother, Stephanie, said that she was like a second mom to her younger siblings. She was bubbly and popular amongst her group of friends. Outgoing, friendly, and positive, Kaye's head teacher said she had a real determination to be successful in life. As is typical of most teenagers, Kaye spent a lot of time on her phone and social media. She was always active on Facebook and loved sharing pictures and statuses with friends and family, friends she knew from school, and new people she was meeting and engaging with online. Friday, 13th, 2015. Just after 3 p.m., Kaye sent a message to her friend Katie saying she wouldn't be able to see her later as she said she would be staying at her aunt's house. That evening, Kaye asked her father Martin for a lift to Ipswich, around a 10-minute drive away from her home in Measham. She told him she was going to meet her friend and would be staying over that weekend. Martin dropped Kaye off outside Ipswich Community College at around 6 p.m. that evening. All seemed well, and the following morning, Kaye was in contact with her parents, asking if she could stay at her friend's house for another night. After that, they heard nothing. For someone that was glued to her mobile phone, this unnerved her parents. They reassured themselves that she was just busy with her friend and remained as calm as they could. But on Sunday the 15th, what turned out to be Kaye's smashed and broken iPhone was found on a street by a member of the public. Upon finding the phone, the man called the last number in Kaye's call history. This number belonged to one of Kaye's friends. As soon as the phone call ended, Kaye's friend phoned Stephanie, Kaye's mother, and told her what had happened. Stephanie was shocked as the friend that had phoned her was the same friend Kaye had said she'd been staying with, but this friend hadn't actually heard from her in days. There was nothing on Kaye's social media, and nobody had spoken to or seen her. Her family knew they had to get the police involved, and she was reported missing later that Sunday. Detective Chief Superintendent David Sandall of Leicestershire Police was leading the investigation, and the case started to move very quickly. Over 400 police officers were working on the searches and interviews. Kaye's laptop was seized, and her smashed but still working phone was taken in for an inspection too. Police began to check through all her messages and social media interactions and posts. They asked about Kaye's state of mind when she left the family home on Friday, but by all accounts, she seemed to be her usual and happy self. Nothing seemed amiss. Stephanie said she knew something bad had happened to her daughter, and despite Kaye's father Martin and the police doing their best to reassure her, Stephanie's gut was telling her that something was deeply wrong. Tragically, just 2 days later, this missing persons case would escalate. Kaye told multiple stories about who she was going to visit that weekend, but one of her friends gave some compelling new evidence. Kaye had confided in this friend and told her that she had started talking to someone on Facebook. She said she was going to visit him on Friday the 13th and asked if her friend would go with her. However, shortly after the plan was set in motion, Kaye canceled and said she was no longer going. Monday 16th, 2 days since anyone had heard from Kaye. To the public and media's shock, the police announced that 2 people had been arrested on suspicion of kidnap after a property in Ipswich had been searched. Over the next couple of days, Searches were carried out across the whole of Ipswich and surrounding areas. Items of clothing confirmed to be Kaylee's were found scattered over a 10-mile radius. Less than 24 hours after the two suspects had been arrested on suspicion of kidnap, they were rearrested, this time on suspicion of the murder of Kaye Hayward. On the November 18th at around 10 p.m., the police made a tragic discovery. It was confirmed that it was Kaye Hayward's body. She had been beaten to death. Her jaw and nose were both broken, and her body was covered in injuries and self-defense wounds. There were 42 breaks to her body, 16 breaks to her face, and 6 lacerations to the back of her head. The post-mortem examination also determined that she had been subjected to a horrifying sexual assault. The suspects still in custody on suspicion of her murder were Luke Harlow and Stephen Beedman. But how and why had this come to happen and unravel so quickly? In the months leading up to Kaylee's murder, Luke Harlow had attempted to contact a string of underage girls, the youngest being just 13 years old. In some of the messages, he spoke of wanting to kidnap the girls and keep them as slaves. He said, "Having sex with drunk, unconscious girls is my favorite." On the October 31st, 2015, less than a month before Kaylee's body was found, Kaye had received a friend request on Facebook from Luke Harlow, which she accepted. As soon as she did, she got a message from him. "Hey, how are you?" Kaye replied, "Fine. Who are you?" Within about 10 minutes, they had exchanged phone numbers and went on to send over 2,600 messages back and forth over the course of 2 weeks. Kaye and Luke both initially lied about their ages. Kaye made herself 19, and Luke told her he was a year younger. However, Kaye quickly admitted that she was only 15 years old. But this didn't deter Luke Harlow, and he continued to shower her with attention and compliments over the next 2 weeks. He said they needed to keep their relationship a secret, and the messages got more graphic and explicit as the days went on. Luke asked Kaye if she would meet him at his house and they could watch movies and have food together. Luke quickly added more to this plan, and he asked Kaye if she wanted to get drunk with him, as he would be buying vodka for both of them. They made a plan to meet on Friday, November, 2 weeks since they had started talking. Luke told Kaye to lie to her family and friends about where she was going and who she was meeting so that their relationship could remain a secret. It is unknown exactly what happened on that Friday night, but Kaylee's friends said she had woken to a message sent from Kaylee's iPhone just after 9 p.m. on Friday night. The message simply said, "Help." Her friend texted her back and asked her what she'd meant. She said she got a message straight back saying, "I meant hello." Her friend described the messages as unusual and said they didn't sound like her. Sometime on Sunday morning, Kaye asked her parents if she could stay over at her friend's house for one more night, and they agreed, believing she was safe and with someone they knew. At some point during the Saturday evening, Luke ran out of alcohol and went to his neighbors to get some more. Stephen Beedman, a landscape gardener, lived just a stone's throw away from Luke, but he had no alcohol either. Both men went to the shops for more drinks, and then both returned to Luke's house. There was no mention of Stephen's name in any of the chat logs or messages between Luke and Kaye, so it is fairly certain she had no knowledge that Stephen even existed. The events that transpired in the following hours are nothing short of horrific. In the late evening of Saturday night, neighbors heard banging and crashing sounds coming from inside the house. Kaye, having been plied with alcohol, was sexually assaulted by Harlow. She fled the house without her shoes, naked from the waist down, being chased down by beadmen. A witness whose house overlooked the pathway near Harlow's home looked outside his window that night and saw what he initially thought was a police officer attempting to restrain a young girl by pinning her to the ground. He then assumed it was a young couple having some sort of domestic argument as he saw the pair get up and walk away holding hands. He said he didn't see or hear anything from them again. Stephen Beedman marched Kaye to a car park where he subjected her to a horrifying sexual assault. He then proceeded to walk with Katie to a park area. Katie managed to break away and start running, but Beedman caught up with her, and Katie hit Beedman in the face with a brick. Beedman then picked up some brick and beat her to death with it. The wounds on Beedman's face showed just how hard Kaye had fought until the end. As soon as she was reported missing just a day later, police quickly discovered the messages between Luke and Kaye. Luke Carlo's property was then searched. Police saw that the house was in chaos, and some of Kaylee's belongings were still there. Luke Carlo was immediately brought in for questioning and placed under arrest for kidnap. He admitted that Kaye had been at his house and said that he knew it was wrong because of her age, but he said he had woken up the next morning to find her missing and assumed that she had gone home during the night. He told police that he and his neighbor, Stephen Beedman, had gone to go and buy more alcohol and returned to the house together. Harlow then claimed that he went to bed drunk, leaving Kaye and Beedman alone. With this, the hunt was on to find Stephen Beedman. He was found at a family member's house and was swiftly brought in for questioning and arrested on suspicion of kidnap. Police were immediately taken aback by the scratches covering Beedman. His face was a picture that instantly spoke 1,000 words. Beederman also denied knowing where Kaye was and said he had left Luke Harlow and her together on the sofa in Harlow's house. Both men said they had been drinking excessively, and a lot of the night was either hazy or a total blackout. However, between the messages, the witness statements, and the marks on Beedman's face, it was clear for all to see that both Harlow and Beedman were the people responsible for what had happened to Kaye Hayward. Police also later found images of child abuse on Beedman's computers. A series of interviews later, Stephen Beedman admitted that he and Kaye had left the house together that night. He asked investigators if he could talk with his appropriate adult. He then finally told the police where Kaye was. When officers finally found Kaylee's body, it was so damaged that the police could not allow Stephanie and Martin to see their daughter in that state. Instead, they arranged for the pair to hold Kaylee's hand, but nothing more. Kaylee's body was identified using dental records. On the November 20th, 2015, shortly after being arrested, Leicestershire police announced that Stephen Beedman had been charged with rape and murder, and Luke Harlow had been charged with grooming and 2 counts of sexual activity with a child. In February, Kaylee's funeral was held. Bows were tied around trees in Kaylee's favorite color, purple. Hundreds of mourners packed out the streets of Measham as her coffin was carried on a white horse-drawn carriage. Outpourings of grief, sadness, and anger for what had happened was apparent in the whole community. Luke Harlow and Stephen Beedman eventually plead guilty to the crimes, but the prosecution weren't satisfied with these pleas and put another charge of false imprisonment forward for both men. Both of them plead not guilty to this charge, and so with the blessing of Kaylee's family, prosecutor Miranda Moore QC took it to trial. In June 2016, the trial of Stephen Beedman and Luke Harlow began on Nottingham Crown Court, with Judge Mrs. Justice Cox presiding. Prosecutor Miranda Moore argued that the way in which Luke Harlow's house was found by the police showed obvious signs of a struggle, and that Kaye had been held there against her will. Things were smashed and broken, items were knocked over, and the house was in disarray. She also said that Luke Harlow's claims of being asleep and having no idea what had happened to Kaye didn't add up either. Luke's glasses had been smashed, presumably due to Kaye fighting him off. The state that the house was in was further backed up by neighbors who said they had heard banging and crashing sounds, and this likely would have woken Harlow if he was asleep. Stephen Beedman simply said that Kaye was free to leave the house at any time she wanted. After a painful 2-week trial for the family and friends of Kaye Hayward, the jury had reached their verdict. Both Luke Harlow and Stephen Beedman were found guilty of false imprisonment, alongside their previous guilty pleas. Luke Harlow was sentenced to 12 years for meeting a child following sexual grooming, 2 counts of sexual activity with a child, attempting to meet 2 other 15-year-old girls following sexual grooming, and false imprisonment. Stephen Beedman was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 35 years for the false imprisonment, rape, and murder of Kaye Hayward. Justice Cox said of the case, "The pain, terror, and anguish that would have been suffered by this young girl is truly horrifying to contemplate. I am entirely satisfied on the evidence that she would have been acutely distressed and frightened. It seems to me this is every parent's worst nightmare. It is absolutely clear to me, absolutely no blame can be attached to them for what happened." In April 2021, it was announced that Stephen Beedman had died in prison. In a statement, a spokesperson said, "The prison service cannot confirm the cause of death, which is rightly a matter for the coroner." Following the tragic events that unfolded on November 13th, Kaylee's family set up Kaylee's Cause, which would campaign to increase the minimum age for use of social media websites to 16. The family wants site operators to request some sort of legal document, like a passport or driver's license to prove a child's age, even if they have permission of their parents to open the account. Alongside this, a short film entitled Kaylee's Love Story was created by Leicestershire Police in Affectious Films. It aims to highlight the dangers of speaking to strangers online and raises awareness for the Cease campaign, commitment to eradicate abuse and sexual exploitation. With the permission of Kaylee's family, the film reenacted some of the events that transpired during the last 14 days of Kaylee's life. It went on to receive numerous awards and has proven to be Leicestershire Police's most successful campaign. It has now been seen by thousands of school children across the country and millions more across the world online, making sure that people become aware of Kaylee's story. I've left a link to this video alongside some other resources in the description box below. Catherine and Sheila were born to John and Mary Lyon in Kensington, Maryland. The two sisters also had an older brother named Jay, who went on to work as a homicide investigator. John Lyon, their father, was popular for being a radio host on Mal Radio. The family resided in a quiet, middle-class community during a time when parents were less concerned about sudden abductions and disappearances. Parents would often allow their kids to play outside. Things were easier in that era when everyone looked out for one another's kids. Both Catherine and Sheila were honor roll students at school. They kept their money in piggy banks, and like most kids, they decorated their bedrooms with posters of Kenny Loggins and John Denver. Catherine and Sheila made the decision to walk to the nearby Wheaton Plaza Mall on the first day of their Easter break from school. They had intended to visit the Easter exhibits that afternoon and eat at the Orange Bowl pizza place, which was about a half-mile from their house. They agreed to be back at their house by 4 p.m., having left home around 11 a.m. When the Lyon sisters didn't come home that evening, their parents called the police by 7 p.m. Police began a thorough search by going through every tree stand and patch of weeds. Scuba divers were sent by the police into ponds and storm sewers, as well as into each abandoned home and building. The Lyons' neighbors volunteered to search in the streets and woods. The extensive search for the Lyon sisters lasted for months and attracted a lot of media attention as well as hundreds of tips. However, as tips decreased, the Lyons family began to lose hope and became desperate for answers. Witnesses informed the police that the sisters were at the mall at 1 p.m. A young boy who knew Catherine and Sheila reported to the police that he saw the two of them together outside the Orange Bowl conversing with an unidentified man who appeared to be in his 60s and was dressed in a brown suit. He described the man walking around with a tape recorder inside a brown briefcase and children nearby speaking into the microphone. One witness residing in Manassas, Virginia, claimed to have seen the two girls bound and gagged in the back of a 1968 Ford station wagon about 2 weeks after they vanished. This lead was later classified as questionable by the police. The incident sparked a media frenzy and led to calls from extortionists, psychics, and people looking for attention. The Lyons' home received several calls in the weeks that followed. People called to demand money as ransom in exchange for the girls. The Lyons were instructed by one man to leave $10,000 in a courthouse restroom in Annapolis. Following this, the police instructed the Lyon family to pay a ransom of just $101 in the briefcase, enough to make it a federal crime. But the ransom was never collected. A week after the kidnapping, an 18-year-old boy named Lloyd Welch visited the Wheaton Plaza Outlet Mall, where the Lyon sisters were last seen. Lloyd Welch went up to a security guard and revealed that he had been present when the girls disappeared from the mall. According to Lloyd, he saw a man who was speaking to the girls before their disappearance. Lloyd Welch's background wasn't well known. Welch was a carnival worker who hopped from town to town and was viewed as a drifter. The police interviewed him while carrying out a lie detector test. Lloyd, however, failed the police-administered lie detector test. But despite failing, he was quickly eliminated as a suspect and viewed as an unreliable witness because they felt he just wanted the spotlight on him and was probably interested in the $9,000 reward in the case. As the investigation progressed, a young girl who was a friend of the Lyon sisters provided another solid lead. The girl's identity has been kept secret to this day out of concern for retaliation. She claimed to have seen a man who possibly abducted Catherine and Sheila. She described the man as being white, in his late teens or early 20s, wearing ragged clothing with acne and scars on his left cheek. According to the girl, the man was staring at her so intensely at the mall that she felt compelled to approach him and say something. The police drew a sketch of the suspect but didn't release it to the public. All leads were exhausted, and the Lyon sisters' case went cold for a long time. In 2013, the Catherine and Sheila Lyon cold case was reopened by detectives. They combed through case files that contained interviews, witness statements, and sketches of potential suspects. At a point, they concentrated on the 18-year-old Lloyd Lee Welch, who made a statement to the police in 1975. Lloyd Welch described the abduction of the Lyon sisters in great detail during his interview, claiming to have seen it happen. As earlier stated, authorities at the time weren't particularly concerned with Lloyd Welch because they believed he had provided them with false information in order to obtain the reward money. While investigators kept going through the case files, they discovered Lloyd Welch's resemblance to one of the 1970s composite sketches of the potential kidnapper. When they dug deeper into his whereabouts, police discovered that Lloyd Welch had a lengthy criminal history. This included an arrest in 1977 in Montgomery County for breaking into a home 8 blocks from Wheaton Plaza and stealing $580 in jewelry. He had been charged with numerous offenses, including rape in 3 states, since the sisters' disappearance between 1973 and 1977. While trying to track him down, detectives learned that Lloyd Welch was in jail for abusing a child. They paid Welch a visit in jail to see if they could establish a connection between his case and that of Catherine and Sheila. Detectives were taken aback by what Lloyd Lee Welch said when they first met him at the prison where he was being held. "I know why you're here. You're here about those 2 missing kids," Lloyd Welch said. Welch was a carnival worker who hopped from town to town and was viewed as a drifter. Welch, who worked for a carnival company in 1975, visited various parts of the country and was in Maryland when Catherine and Sheila Lyon vanished. After a lengthy conversation with Lloyd Welch, the detectives identified Richard Welch, Lloyd's uncle, as a person of interest as well. They think he was a security guard in Wheaton in the 1970s. Lloyd Welch acknowledged leaving Wheaton Plaza with the Lyon sisters, but he categorically denied harming them. He claimed to have taken the girls to his uncle's property in Bedford County, Virginia, and never heard from them again. Lloyd Welch alleged that his father and uncle killed the girls after sexually abusing them, then burned their bodies. Detectives were unable to verify Lloyd Welch's claims because his father had already passed away, and there was no proof to bring an accusation against his uncle. Amidst these revelations, investigators received an unexpected call that would finally bring a crack in the case. Henry Parker, a relative of Lloyd Welch, told police that in December 1975, he had visited his cousin, Lloyd Welch, at a house in Virginia and assisted him in removing 2 duffel bags. The bags, according to Parker, smelled of death and had red stains all over them. He further said that they burned the bags in the isolated mountainous region of Bedford County, Virginia. At that point, investigators had what they needed to prosecute Lloyd Welch. He was charged by the police with the kidnapping and killing of Catherine and Sheila Lyon. Welch allegedly abducted the 2 girls from the mall and took them hundreds of miles away to a remote location. He then killed the girls and set their bodies on fire. 10 women came forward to give their testimony in court about how Welch also abducted them. Police were informed by one of the women, who is now in her 50s, that Welch had approached her outside of a record shop. He pretended to be a police officer and informed her that she needed to talk to him about her brother stealing a radio. She said Lloyd Welch departed immediately after she tried making a call to her brother. While Welch was serving time for other cases, he faced his trial for the murders of Catherine and Sheila Lyon. He finally admitted being guilty to the charges after the case dragged on for 2 years. The family can finally rest easy knowing that the murderer of their daughters has been brought to justice after being tracked down for so long. Police believe the sisters were held against their will, raped, murdered, possibly dismembered, and burned. However, the specifics of the case are still somewhat murky. Due to his advanced age and the fact that he is already serving a 33-year sentence in Delaware for a separate offense, Lloyd Welch was given a sentence of 48 years. He will probably live all his life in prison. When the trial was over, John Lyon thanked the judges. It had been a difficult 3 years for him, his wife, and his 2 sons. However, he expressed his gratitude for the detectives working on the case, saying that they had treated his daughters like their own for the past 3 years, and for that he would always be grateful. The dynamics of the Lyons family were drastically altered by Catherine and Sheila's disappearance. John Lyon started assisting other families dealing with tragedy and loss as a victim's advocate in Montgomery County. The state of Maryland was shocked by Lloyd Welch's conviction. A typical afternoon for the Lyons family descended into the worst nightmare imaginable. The tireless detectives who turned over every stone to crack the case have finally brought some peace. Take a look at this photo. It shows Rexford Lynn Keel Jr., better known as Lynn Keel, and his wife Elizabeth, Bess Edwards Keel. They were married for over 20 years. In February 2005, Lynn worked as a truck driver, and Elizabeth was an employee of Microbach Laboratories. Probably many of us have pictures that when we look at them, we realize that shortly after the picture was taken, the lives of the people depicted in it changed dramatically. These words can be fully applied to this one as well. Lynn and Elizabeth lived in this house, which is located in Nash County, North Carolina. As you can see on the map, the place is quite secluded. As 2005 drew to a close, Lynn and Elizabeth, like many people, were making plans for the next year. But on January 1st, 2006, trouble came to their house. It was cold, and the steps outside the house were covered in ice. As Elizabeth was leaving the house, she slipped and fell, hitting her head hard on the corner of the concrete steps. The injuries she sustained was fatal. The medical examiner who performed the autopsy concluded that Elizabeth had died from a blunt force trauma to the head, and her death was ruled an accident. For her husband, relatives, colleagues, and friends, Elizabeth's sudden death was a great shock. She was only 42 years old. About 1 year passed and Lynn Keel decided to move on. He was no longer a truck driver, but worked in real estate. In February 2007, he visited Latin America in a work-related visit. On that trip, Lynn, who was 45 years old at the time, met Diana, who was 19 years his junior. Diana was from Bogota, Colombia. She was strikingly beautiful, kind, and a single mom with a daughter. The relationship between them quickly developed, and with her thoughts of the American dream, Diana moved to the United States. She and Lynn began living in his home in Nash County, where about a year earlier, his wife Elizabeth Keel had died in an accident. It wasn't long before Diana and Lynn were married, and a short time later, the couple had a son named Max. In 2017, Diana graduated from Nash Community College. That same year, she began working as an emergency room nurse at Wilson Medical Center. The first few years of their life together were nothing special, but over time, their relationship began to deteriorate. Diana told her close friend that Lynn was an overbearing man who spoke sharply to her and very often verbally abused her. The atmosphere in the house was almost always very tense. Lynn would not allow Diana to be alone with anyone for long periods of time. She began to think about divorce, but she was afraid of her husband because he threatened her. He manipulated her with the baby. He threatened her and told her that if she left him, he would deport her and that she would never see her son again. Diana put up with it all because her children came first for her, but everyone's patience comes to an end sooner or later. In 2019, Diana's daughter Laura was 18, a graduate of Southern Nash High School and a freshman at the University of North Carolina at Wilmington, and 10-year-old Max was living with his parents. As I said, Diana worked as a nurse at Wilson Medical Center. She was loved and respected by patients and colleagues alike. On March 7, 2019, Diana's mother, Esperanza Prada, who lived in Colombia, received a message in which Diana wrote, "Mom, I love you very much." The message came completely out of the blue. Esperanza knew her daughter didn't have a happy marriage and that she wanted to divorce her husband but was afraid of him. It was only 3 days after that, and Diana's daughter Laura sounded the alarm. On March 10th, she tweeted out a plea for help to find her mother. The message said, "This is insane. You see this happen to everyone else, and you don't think it's ever going to happen to you guys. My mom is missing. If you see or hear anything, please let me know. And please retweet this. Help me get the word out. Thank you." That same day, Laura called the medical center where her mother worked, but none of Diana's co-workers had spoken to her in the past 2 days. An employee of the medical center called the police and asked for a welfare check on Diana. A co-worker told the dispatcher that Diana hadn't been heard from in 2 days. She was supposed to work tonight. "She's on the schedule," the Wilson Medical Center nurse said. "She's the type of co-worker. She's always like 30 minutes early. And if you text her, she replies back like, reasonably. She has not done any of them." The woman said it was out of character for Diana and asked the sheriff's office to perform a welfare check. Diana was a devoted mother who was in touch with her family every day. She checked her social media regularly, but now her messages went unread and her FaceTime calls unanswered. When a police officer arrived at the Keel family home, Lynn was there. It was surprising that his wife's disappearance had been reported to the police by her co-workers, not him. Lynn told the police officer that he had last seen Diana 2 days earlier on March 8th when she left the house. Her car was still parked outside the house, which also aroused suspicion, so Lynn was called in for questioning. When questioned, Keel, 57, said his wife had gone out to run some errands and hadn't returned. He said she would leave from time to time and wouldn't return for several days. It was a statement that didn't ring true. Without any charges, the man was released. Diana was reported missing and the police began searching for her. Investigators were able to determine that the woman had not used her cell phone or bank cards in the past few days, and that was not a good sign. This house, as I said at the beginning of the video, is in a secluded location, and there are no neighbors to share any important information with the police. Nevertheless, detectives learned that on the morning of March 8th, the couple was seen having a heated argument on their front porch. A courier had delivered a package addressed to Diana that day, and he was the last person to see her, not counting Lynn Keel, of course. After the police interviewed Diana's co-workers, who told them that she was having problems with her husband, there was no doubt that she would not abandon her son and run away. The only thing that stopped her from divorcing was the fear of losing custody of her 10-year-old son. Lynn Keel. Early in the investigation, an ominous discovery was made. 2 years before Diana went missing, Lynn had insured her life for more than $1 million, and he was the sole beneficiary of this insurance. In February 2008, sheriff's deputies responded to a domestic dispute in the house, although no further action was taken. Only 2 days had passed since the investigation began, and the police received a disturbing call. During the emergency call, a man later identified as an employee of the North Carolina Department of Transportation said, "He found something on Pokes Hole Road. It looks like something is laying in the woods," he said. "I don't know what it is. A body, a something, I don't know. How far down is it?" The dispatcher asked. "Right here at the end," the caller said. "I will be waiting right here." Unfortunately, what the man who called the police saw was Diana's body, which from the looks of it had been there since the day she disappeared. It turned out that the worker was checking an illegal dump when he saw something suspicious. Pokes Hole Road is a dead-end street leading to farmland, and the fact that the body was found was fortunate, if fortunate is the right word under the circumstances. Who knows how long it would have taken the police to find Diana's body, for it was 30 miles away from her home. I've heard nobody that knew her had anything negative to say about this woman. Nash County Sheriff Keith Stone said, "What a tragic event. Even more tragic, we now have a 10-year-old without a mom." Stone added, "It's very difficult, especially when I see life as it is and how fragile it is. And now we have a kid without a mother. It's very difficult. We have a lot of unanswered questions. That's the reason we, as the Nash County Sheriff's Office, operate with compassion, honor, and diligence. Although it remains unclear how the woman died, there is definitely foul play involved." The police had only one suspect, Lynn Keel. When he was informed that his wife had been found dead, he was very surprised. He was brought to the station for questioning where he answered to investigators. He claimed as before that Diana had often gone away for several days, but that she had always returned. These words were inconsistent with what Diana's colleagues, relatives, and friends had said. Everyone knew that Lynette Keel controlled his wife's every move. He even forbade her to see her friends. After the interrogation, the man was released because the results of the autopsy had not yet been obtained. 2 days after the discovery of the body, authorities officially confirmed that the body was family, is laid to rest in a manner much more fitting than her death, and to make sure my brother continues to feel the love that our mother shared with us daily, she wrote. By doing so, I hope to honor my mother's legacy. Diana's cousin living in Colombia told reporters that the mother of two came to North Carolina to live the American dream, but it ended up being a nightmare. I can't believe it, said Javier Guevara. I can't believe it. It's very, very sad. After the medical examiner's report was obtained, the frightening details of Diana's death became known. She had extensive skull fractures as well as multiple sharp injuries on the left side of her face and neck. Some of the injuries were post-mortem, which could mean that the person who inflicted them had a personal grudge against Diana. By the time police arrived to arrest Lynette Keel and search his home, he had gone on the run. He was put on a nationwide wanted list, and a report stated that he might be driving a gold-colored pickup truck and warned that he might be dangerous. It was learned that after Lynette Keel left the police station after being questioned, he drove his 10-year-old son to his parents' home, took his father's car, and fled. According to a warrant to search the home Diana and Lynette Keel shared, authorities seized a variety of firearms, including rifles, pistols, and revolvers. Also seized were swords, a machete, and several knives. Warrants show that authorities found 2 pages from a diary belonging to Diana Keel's 18-year-old daughter inside a Dodge Ram Lynette Keel owned. When the sheriff was asked about their contents, he replied that he did not feel comfortable divulging what was written on those pages. Meanwhile, the search for Lynette Keel continued. It was determined that he had left the state, but his whereabouts were unknown. Stone said the sheriff's office had received calls from Texas and Florida about Keel's truck, but no additional details about his capture were confirmed. He asked the public to drive by local motels and hotels and see if they would notice a pickup truck with the license plate number listed on the information sheet distributed. We have no idea where he might be, he said. This is an opportunity for the public to help because this person is dangerous. On March 17, 2019, 5 days after Diana's body was discovered, Lynette Keel was seized by Arizona State Police 34 miles from the U.S. border with Mexico. He was in possession of a large sum of cash and a large quantity of various canned goods. He was allegedly planning to cross the border and escape into Mexican territory. After his arrest, Lynette Keel was airlifted to Nash County, where he was charged in connection with the death of his wife, Diana. Experts believed she was still alive when she was loaded into her own SUV, driven into the woods, and left for dead. Lynette Keel was therefore also charged with kidnapping. When searching the house, forensic investigators found overwhelming evidence that the attack on Diana took place in the bedroom. According to the prosecutor, after taking Diana to a remote area, Keel went to a local Walmart where he bought cleaning supplies with which he tried to cover up evidence of the crime. After he was arrested, Diana's daughter, Laura, wrote the following words on her Facebook account. I know everyone has a certain feeling towards what my stepdad did to my family. However, I beg all of you not to spread hate. My brother has such a pure heart that he doesn't need to see that hate. We all need to focus on how wonderful my mother was to heal us as best we can. The brutal nature of the crime and Keel's subsequent flight from justice drew local, state, and national media attention to the case. The media attention caused the public defender at the time to ask for a change in venue so that a jury pool could be selected outside of Nash County. Despite the widespread nature of the media attention focused on the crime, the motion for a change in venue focused specifically on the perceptions in Nash County. The media coverage included, among other things, press conferences by the Nash County Sheriff, many written articles in local newspapers, online articles, television coverage, as well as social media discussion. Discussion in the media included speculations surrounding the passing of the defendant's previous wife, the motion stated. The state objected to the motion, but did note that the state had concerns over efficiency and a waste of resources and time should a trial begin in Nash County, and then be required to be transferred to another venue after the trial process begins in Nash County, the motion stated. In the end, Nash County Superior Court Judge Quinton Sumner decided to move the venue to Pitt County. In the document outlining his decision, Sumner stated that there exists in Nash County a prejudice against this defendant, so that he cannot obtain a fair and impartial trial within Nash County. In October 2021, Rexford Lynn Keel, 59, pleaded no contest to the charges against him to avoid a lengthy trial. A no contest plea, similar to a guilty plea, means that the defendant accepts responsibility for the charge. Keel pled to second-degree murder and first-degree kidnapping. Keel's defense attorneys asked that the judge takes into account that he has been experiencing kidney failure and has been incarcerated for the past 2 years. But at sentencing, Diana's mother reminded the court of the reason her daughter was no longer alive. She said she wanted to tell women that if their partner was abusive, they needed to run. "Don't stay there," she begged as she asked the judge for a severe sentence. "I want you to have the same compassion for Keel that he had when he killed her." Diana's cousin released the following statement. "From all of Diana Alejandra Keel's family, we want to extend a huge thank you to all law enforcement involved in apprehending and bringing Lynn Keel, the suspect in Diana's murder, to face justice. I want to express the immense gratitude our family has felt, including the true empathy from the Mass County Sheriff's Office, along with so many heartfelt messages of support and love since this nightmare began. We know Diana Alejandra has been seen by the public for the amazing mother, daughter, sister, cousin, friend, and co-worker that she was. She loved her 2 children more than I can ever express. Everything she did was for them. She brought joy into this world with her contagious laugh, bright smile, and huge heart for others, including animals. To all that knew her and those that would have liked to have known her, please think of her and her children only with the kindest thoughts and positive energy possible. Thank you so much for your continued support." Lynn Keel did not say what the motive for the crime was. Perhaps he learned that Diana was meeting with a lawyer and wanted to begin divorce proceedings. We should also not forget the insurance policy worth more than $1 million. Under the plea agreement, Lynn Keel was sentenced to between 32 and 41 years in prison. But that's not all. Police had questions relating to the death of Lynn Keel's first wife, Elizabeth. Was her death really an accident? Her family said they always had questions about her death. In a statement, Elizabeth Keel's family said they have always questioned Bess's death and feel deeply saddened that another life has now been taken. "We're going to work all the leads on that, and we're going to go back and look at the information we had on the first incident reports," Stone said. "We're going to talk with the district attorney's office. It's something that we need to be looking at." Elizabeth Keel is buried in a family plot in Spring Hope. Stone said right now he is working with a pathologist and going over all of the evidence, who said there is a strong possibility they will exhume Elizabeth Keel's body. Dr. John Butts was the chief medical examiner in North Carolina for 24 years. One would only go to exhume a body if there was some question that wasn't addressed at the time that could be addressed by re-examining the remains. Butts said, according to him, there have been many cases in his career where a death deemed accidental turned out to be murder. Someone falls off of something and was killed, and then additional information turns out that they didn't fall. They were pushed, and there would be no difference in examination. We'd have the same findings, but of course now the circumstances leading up to why it happened have changed. But said, no new information related to the death of Elizabeth Keel has appeared over the past 2 years. We can assume that authorities have found no reason to reopen the investigation and exhume the body, but it is possible that we will hear more about this case in the future. Helen Elizabeth Bailey was born on the August 22, 1964 in Northumberland, England. She was a popular children's author and is probably most remembered for her series, The Crazy World of Electra Brown. She had originally intended to become a forensic scientist, but quickly fell in love with media and worked on marketing and licensing campaigns for characters in the Rugrats and Garfield. When Helen was 23, she met the man who would later become her husband. In 1996, she married John Simfield, the head of a licensing rights company, and she soon started writing more, throwing herself into her children and teenage stories. This creative outlet quickly turned into a flourishing career, and her books were incredibly popular and well-loved. But in February 2011, tragedy struck. She and her husband John were holidaying in Barbados when he went for a morning swim in the sea. But before long, Helen heard John cry out from the water. He had become caught in a riptide, and tragically, he drowned. They had been together for 22 years. By way of helping the grieving process, Helen threw herself into her writing. She started a blog called Planet Grief. It was a way of processing her own emotions, and it allowed for others affected by grief and loss to reach out and share their stories too. Very much a community-based blog where anyone was welcome, Helen would post suggested readings and websites that might help other people through the various stages of grief. Her openness and honesty made her easy to connect with, and through her blog and her memoir, she helped many other people going through the same things. It was through Planet Grief that in October 2011, Helen met Ian Stewart. Ian's wife Diane had died very suddenly in February 2010. Their relationship began just as supportive friends, but they soon became a lot closer, and Helen would describe their union as two grieving families coming together. The pair began dating and eventually became engaged. They moved into a beautiful gated home together in the picturesque town of Royston in Hertfordshire. They lived with Ian's two sons and Helen's beloved dog Boris, who had come from Helen's marriage to John. It seemed that after so much tragedy in both of their lives, they had eventually found happiness again. However, on the April 15th, just before 4 p.m., 999 received a phone call. As well as her home in Royston, she had another property in Kent by the seaside, somewhere she would often go to write and take some time for herself. But it was clear that neither she nor anyone else had been there in quite some time. By all accounts, it appeared that Helen had left a few days prior with her dog Boris to get some space and clear her head. But nobody had heard from her since, and this was extremely out of character for Helen. Her neighbors and close friends wondered if her stressful work schedule had caused her to drop off the grid for a while. Days turned into weeks, and with no trace of Helen turning up anywhere, 6 weeks after Helen disappeared, the police started to expand their search. They also took another look at her seaside cottage in Broadstairs, Kent, and examined her Wi-Fi router. Her phone had been going to voicemail since she had last been seen on Monday, April. But it seemed that on the April 16th, there was a glimmer of hope that she had in fact been there. Helen Bailey's mobile phone had briefly connected to the Wi-Fi in her cottage. Police wondered if Helen had in fact been in Broadstairs the whole time. Following this, a closer look at her bank transactions gave them more hope that Helen was still out there, as there had been activity on her account. A new appeal was made, and police now wondered if Helen was using another name to avoid being detected. Further analysis of the accounts showed that a standing order from Helen's personal account to her joint account had been increased. It had gone from £600 a month to £4,000 a month. Her bank card had also been used to renew an Arsenal season ticket costing £3,000. It soon became clear that it wasn't Helen moving this money around at all. It was her partner, Ian Stewart. Police went back to the house that Ian shared with Helen. They knew they urgently needed to speak to him, but Ian wasn't there. He had left to go on a 2-week Spanish holiday that both he and Helen were meant to go on together. Neighbors were baffled that Ian had left the country with everything going on at the time, but detectives sat tight and waited for him to return. On July 11th, 3 months after Helen Bailey had last been seen, officers arrived at the home she shared with Ian. And just after 7 a.m., Ian was arrested. Police carried out a more extensive search of the couple's property, and on July 15th, they finally found Helen Bailey. Her body was discovered in the house's cesspit beneath the garage. Alongside her body was her beloved dog, Boris. It was determined that she had been suffocated, but it was inconclusive as to whether or not she was suffocated and definitely dead before she was put in there, or whether she suffocated to death while inside the cesspit. It was a truly harrowing and terrifying question. DCI Kent said of Ian, "He knows every time he uses the facilities in the house, that's where it's going. That's an incredibly cruel and cynical way to dispose of someone you claim to love and were set to marry." Ian had purposely parked the Jeep over the top of the cesspit during the police's initial searches to prevent it from being detected. Ian Stewart was subsequently charged with the murder of Helen Bailey. It seemed that Ian had been plotting for quite some time. Helen Bailey had written up her will in February 2012, in which she had left her fortune to her brother John, stepson Daniel, and friend Jenny. But in February 2014, she changed it so that Ian would inherit the majority of her assets, and he wouldn't be left financially vulnerable. Helen also took out a life insurance policy to cover a potential £1,200,000 inheritance tax bill in case she died before they got married. Several months before Helen was killed, in February, Ian began giving her the sleeping aid Zocalone, which had been prescribed to him for sleeping problems. He often crushed it up and put it in her breakfast in the morning. Over the next few months, Helen became concerned about her energy levels and sleeping. She made several internet searches that included "Why do I keep falling asleep?" and "falling asleep in the afternoon." On Monday, April 11, 2016, Helen spent the morning looking at wedding venues and sending emails. Sometime between 10:51 a.m. and 2:30 p.m., Ian drugged Helen into a stupefied state, but the timing of her death is still inconclusive. He disposed of her body in the cesspit beneath the garage of the house, and shortly after, he threw in her dog Boris as well. It was a truly callous and cold-hearted crime. After this, Ian increased the standing order to transfer money from Helen's bank account to their joint Santander account. Ian was supposed to visit the doctor's surgery just before 3 p.m., but he phoned the GP and said he was having car trouble and asked to rearrange his appointment for later on. After he visited the GP, he was caught on camera making a trip to the refuse center to dispose of a duvet. Following this, he met with Helen's solicitor and tried to hastily push through the sale of one of Helen's houses. Helen's solicitor described him as quite aggressive. He refused to discuss the matter any further on the basis that Helen wasn't present. That evening, Ian went to watch his son play bowls before buying a Chinese takeaway for them both. He sent a text message to her phone with just 2 kisses in the message. A few days passed, and Helen's family and friends were becoming concerned that they hadn't heard from her. They contacted Ian, which prompted him to phone the police and report her as missing. No one saw the note that Helen allegedly left on the side, and police believed it was all part of a web of lies that Ian was spinning. On April 16, 2016, Ian drove to Helen's cottage in Kent with her mobile phone. When he got there, Helen's phone briefly connected to the Wi-Fi. He then continued to live his life as if nothing had happened. DCI Jerome Kent, who led the investigation, said Ian Stewart was the most bizarre, manipulative, greedy, and self-centered man he had ever met. The murder appeared to be based on nothing more than pure greed. In February, the trial of Ian Stewart began. In his own defense, Ian Stewart claimed that Helen and her dog Boris had been kidnapped on April 11, 2016 by 2 men called Nick and Joe. He said he hadn't told the police about this to keep Helen safe, but the elusive Nick and Joe demanded £500,000 in ransom money. Ian said he spoke to Helen for the last time on a phone belonging to one of the men on April 15th. Following this claim, Ian was presented with 2 men in court. The prosecution believed that they had found the men that Ian had based the descriptions of the kidnappers on. Nick Cook was Stewart's next-door neighbor, and Joe Sapullo, who he had known for several years prior in his old home. He had admitted to knowing both the men, but said they didn't match the description of the kidnappers. Several of Helen's neighbors gave evidence that they had seen Helen walk Boris on the day she disappeared. Another witness claimed that he saw Helen in Broadstairs near her cottage. This was after April 11th. But under cross-examination, this witness admitted that the sighting could have been back in March, before she was considered missing, and that he hadn't thought about this sighting until a journalist had interviewed him. After a 7-week trial and just 6 hours of deliberation, on the February 22, 2017, the jury found Ian Stewart guilty of the murder of Helen Bailey. At St. Albans Crown Court the next day, Judge Andrew Bright sentenced him. Ian Stewart refused to appear via a video link to hear his sentencing. Judge Bright said it was difficult to imagine a more heinous crime. Ian Stewart was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 34 years. He will be 90 years old before he becomes eligible for parole. DCI Jerome Kent said that although it was the correct and right verdict, there were no winners in this case. As a result of this case, detectives began re-examining the death of Ian Stewart's previous wife Diane, who had died after an epileptic seizure at the couple's home in February 2010. In August 2018, Ian Stewart was arrested on suspicion of Diane's murder. If all goes to plan, the trial is set for 2022. Helen Bailey helped and inspired so many people with her compassion, openness, and honesty. She met a tragic end at the hands of someone she believed had bought her the happiness she had been missing. The work on her blog, Planet Grief, and her book, When Bad Things Happen in Good Bikinis, gave many people suffering from loss and grief support, help, and ultimately hope for the future. Lynette White was a beautiful young woman from Cardiff, Wales, who was doing what she believed she had to do in order to get by. She dropped out of school and had been working as a prostitute since she was 14. Being a sex worker wasn't part of Lynette's childhood dream. Weeks before she was found dead, Tim Rogers, a BBC Wales journalist, interviewed her while investigating child prostitution. During the interview, she told Tim how she was drugged, taken to Bristol by a gang of men, and forced into prostitution. Yet, even after Lynette found her way back to Cardiff, she could not find her way out of prostitution. By 1988, Lynette, who was now 20 years old, was working the streets daily as a prostitute. Described as popular and pretty by friends, Lynette was probably the most visible prostitute working in Cardiff at the time. She was the first girl to be out at lunchtime and would be the last to leave at night. Working every day, rain or shine, even on Christmas, earning £100 per night. One would almost think White was working hard to have a better life, but that was not the case. It was all to pay for her boyfriend, Stephen Miller's cocaine addiction. Every night, Miller took £60 to £90 from Lynette, who was his only source of income. Lynette lived with Miller in a flat on Dorset Street in Cardiff. Each day, Miller would drive her to Riverside in Cardiff, where she worked, and meet her later in the evening at the North Star Club to collect her earnings. It continued like that every day until February 9, 1988 was the last day Miller saw Lynette. She had not made contact with Miller or her friends in the days leading up to her death, which was very odd behavior for her. She was also due to make an appearance as a witness for 2 prosecution trials when she disappeared. No one knows the reason why White stopped contacting others 5 days prior to her death. The police thought she was deliberately hiding to avoid giving evidence and began to actively search for her. Earlier that same month, Lyon Vilde, Lynette's friend, had loaned Lynette her keys to a flat for the purpose of taking clients there for sex. On February, Lynette, who probably wanted to use the flat, went there but found it locked, which was quite unusual. Lynette was nowhere to be found. Lyon became very worried about Lynette. She drove to Buchanan police station to report her friend's disappearance. She returned to a James Street flat with 3 policemen who were expecting to serve an arrest warrant on Lynette and take her in. The policemen forced entry into the apartment and found Lynette lying there in a pool of her own blood. A missing witness fell dead with massive injuries. Who murdered Lynette White? According to the autopsy performed by pathologist Bernard Knight, Lynette had been stabbed over 50 times on her chest, face, stomach, wrist, breasts, arms, hands, and inner thighs. Her throat was also savagely slit from ear to ear. Though she was stabbed multiple times, the autopsy revealed that Lynette died from the throat injury. The pathologist also determined that Lynette was murdered on February 14th between 1:45 a.m. and 4 a.m. Lynette's body was found between the foot of the bed and the window, covered in blood. A zoospheric semen, which is semen containing no sperm, was found in her vagina and also under underwear. There were 2 different blood types found on Lynette, her own blood and an AB-type blood, which did not belong to Lynette. Soon the news about Lynette's death had spread and police began to ask questions about the incident. Witnesses told the police that they saw a man looking distressed in the area where Lynette's body was found on James Street. The man looked very suspicious and he appeared to have blood on his hands. The suspicious man, described as a white male, approximately 5'8" to 5'10", and in his mid-30s, became the primary focus of the investigation. Efforts to find this man were exhaustive. Soon they arrested a man that matched the suspect's description, but he was soon released after. Police looked into Miller, Lynette's boyfriend, as the partner of a murder victim is usually the first obvious suspect. Miller was questioned but later released because his blood type didn't match the one found on Lynette. Because Lynette was supposed to appear as a witness against a man named Francine Cordell in court, Francine and his mother were investigated. But soon the two were eliminated as suspects because their blood also did not match the AB blood type found on Lynette. Very little is known about the case against Cordell or the other case that Lynette was set to give evidence in. Another suspect that piqued the investigators' interest was a man who was on a list of 12 persons of interest in the area due to their past criminal activity. He was a sex offender and a pedophile who lived close to James Street. His identity was concealed and he was called Mr. X. When Mr. X was interviewed, he admitted to paying Lynette for sex in the past and was unable to account for his whereabouts at the time of the murder. Mr. X had blood type AB, which prompted the police to run a DNA test on him. When the results came back, it eliminated Mr. X from the investigation. Now all that the police were left with were statements gathered from their door-to-door inquiry. Gromick, who lived in the flat right above where Lynette was murdered, together police informant, also gave an account implicating his common-law brother-in-law, Yusuf Abdullahi. He had Abdullahi knew the killer and later implicated him directly, saying Abdullahi was the killer. It was known to the police that the two detested each other. So again, investigators dismissed the account. Lyon Vilde, who reported Lynette's disappearance on the day she died, was also suspected and questioned. The police visited her daily to question her. The pressure was becoming too much for her to handle. And one day, while she was drunk, she named Miller and Abdullahi as the killers. Violet Parayam, a secretary at the Cardiff Yacht Club, also gave a statement about the incident. 8 months into the investigation, she came forward claiming that on February 14th, while driving home from the club at about 1:30 a.m., she saw 4 excited black males outside the building where Lynette was killed. She then identified 2 of them as John Akhti and Rashid Omar. Piriam's statement would give the case a new direction. Angela Sala, who is mildly mentally retarded, also gave a statement that she saw Miller, John Rashid, Miller, John, where she had Ronnie Acton, John's cousin Tony Paris, and Tony Brace outside 7 James Street on the day Lynette was murdered. This was exactly what police needed, as her account corroborated Piriam's statement. Further implicating Abdullahi, John, Miller, and the rest were Gromick and Atkins, who gave new statements on the same day with Sala. They said they also saw a group of men, including Ronnie and Abdullah. Sala then gave another statement in December 1988 that she heard a scream from Lumet's flat and rushed there with Vilde. Coincidentally, on the same day, Vilde also told the police that she went to the flat after she heard Lynette scream and met Miller, Abdullahi, Ronnie Akhti, Miller's brother, and an unnamed mixed-race man. Unfortunately for Sala, she had an AB blood type. Police insisted that her blood was found on Lynette's socks. She then gave a new statement, but she was part of the killing together with Vilde and the other guys. Vilde also admitted that she was forced to cut Lynette's wrist to ensure her complicity and silence. Miller confessed to killing Lynette after 307 denials. He also implicated the other men maimed, which led to the arrest of all the men allegedly involved in the murder. On December 7, 1988, the police arrested Stephen and Tony Miller, Yusuf Abdullahi, Ronnie Akhti, Rashid Omar, and Martin Tucker. On December 9, 1988, John Akhti and Tony Paris were also arrested. For close to a year, they were locked up until their trial began on October 5, 1989 at Swansea Crown Court. This trial became the longest murder trial in British legal history, lasting 197. After spending 2 years in custody, Ronnie and John Akhti were acquitted of the murder, while Tony Paris, Stephen Miller, and Yusuf Abdullahi were found guilty. Each were sentenced to life imprisonment, and since then, they're known as the Cardiff Three. Even though no forensic evidence linked these men to the crime scene, they were held as the criminals. However, there were a lot of doubts and questions about the convictions. Consequently, the friends and families of the Cardiff Three began a campaign to overturn the convictions. The campaign received massive support and was followed by television documentaries in 1992. By December 1992, the Cardiff Three's appeal was heard. After the Court of Appeal had listened to Miller's interrogation, Lord Taylor said the police had bullied Miller during the interview. Therefore, the truthfulness of Miller's submission was irrelevant. The Cardiff Three were free at last. Their convictions were declared unsafe and unsatisfactory by Lord Taylor. But if the card of three didn't commit the crime, it means the real criminal was still roaming free. It brings us to yet the same question. Who murdered Lynette White? 8 years later, the case was reopened. This time, Professor Dave Barkley and Chief Superintendent Kevin O'Neill were assigned to the task. The case took the officers back to the crime scene. By then, it was already 12 years since the incident happened. While examining the old crime scene photographs, Professor Barkley's eyes caught something that no one else saw in all these years. It was a large drop of blood believed to have been thrown from a knife onto the wallpaper. When the crime was committed in 1988, police removed lots of wallpaper in the floods to be stored as evidence. Upon searching through the old wallpaper evidence, they discovered that the only missing piece of wallpaper was the one that contained the large drop of blood. The forensic scientist didn't give up, though. He continued to study the crime scene photos and realized the blood could have dropped on the skirting board beneath. Underneath several layers of paint, the team found the blood completely sealed in and dry. Traces of the blood were also found on a piece of cellophane wrapper from a cigarette pack. Since then, the detectives and scientists dubbed the suspect Cellophane Man. The forensics team led by Angela Gallup got to work, but shockingly, the DNA profile was not found in any of the 140 police databases. But when the police searched for similar profiles, it was narrowed to just hundreds in the Cardiff area. Using the approach of familial DNA searching, a partial match was eventually made with the profile of a 14-year-old boy. This boy was known to the police as he was once arrested for joyriding in Cardiff. But could he be the Cellophane Man? If you thought about his age, then your guess was right. He wasn't even born when the incident happened. At that time, the case was 15 years old. Notwithstanding, the police had to visit his house. When they got there, they were told that the boy's father was dead, but he had an uncle, Jeffrey Gifford. On February 26, 2003, detectives pulled up at Jeffrey's home, a semi-detached house in the village of Langhurin, 15 miles west of Cardiff, but no one was home. The following day, they checked to Jeffrey's place of work, an office block in Cardiff city center, where he worked as the security guard. When the police explained the reason for their visit, Jeffrey said, "Oh, I thought you got some guys for that." He was asked to provide a mouth swab and he complied. Immediately, police checked the swab. They had finally caught the Cellophane Man. Chief Superintendent Kevin O'Neill was determined to do things right this time. He put a surveillance team on Jeffrey while he made preparations for the interview. Chief O'Neill had plans to put surveillance on Jeffrey for a whole week, but on February 28, 2003, Jeffrey made a crazy move. The surveillance team spotted him at a garage where he bought 3 packets of paracetamol, an over-the-counter pain reliever. By the time the police got to Jeffrey's house, he had taken about 62 paracetamols. Jeffrey denied ever taking those tablets, but he announced, "Just for the record, I did kill Lynette White. I've been waiting for this for 15 years. Whatever happens, I deserve it. I sincerely hope to die." He was taken to the hospital where he told a staff member that he was being watched because of a murder he committed 15 years ago. Jeffrey was prepared to die as he initially refused to be treated. He eventually agreed to take an antidote. Within a few days, he had recovered. On July 4, 2003, Jeffrey pleaded guilty to Lynette White's murder, and the judge, Justice Royce, sentenced him to life imprisonment with a minimum tariff of 12 years and 8 months. Jeffrey's barrister said Jeffrey killed Lynette over 30 pounds for sex. He said Jeffrey wanted his money back when he changed his mind. In February 2007, Atkins, Sela, Vilde, and Gromit were charged with perjury. By December 2008, Sela, Vilde, and Gromit were found guilty and sentenced to 18 months of imprisonment each. Atkins was exempted because it was believed that he was believed threatened, abused, and manipulated to admit to false accounts suggested to him. In March 2009, it was announced that there was enough evidence to prosecute the police officers involved in the initial investigation with conspiracy to pervert the course of justice. In February 2011, the trial collapsed due to missing evidence. In February 2015, 8 of the 15 charged officers cleared of perverting the course of justice launched a high court civil action against the force, suing for malicious prosecution, false imprisonment, and misfeasance. But at the end of February 2015, the judge in the civil action dismissed their case. The 5 falsely accused men were compensated after their release. Stephen Miller was paid £571,000. John Actie was paid £300,000, while Tony Paris was paid £250,000. Rowan Actie died in 2007 after much struggle to cope with what had happened to him. Youssef Abdullahi also died in 2011 of perforated cancer. He too had battled with post-traumatic stress disorder. And that's it on the Lynette White case. Let us know your thoughts in the comments section. Jill Wendy Dando was born on November 9, 1961 in Somerset, England. She was inquisitive, intelligent, and always hardworking. Knowing exactly what she wanted to do with her career, she studied journalism before going on to work as a trainee reporter for a local newspaper called the Western Mercury, alongside her father and brother. After several years working in different areas and across many fields, she began working for the BBC and quickly moved up the ranks. In early 1988, Jill started presenting the national news in London. She also began presenting television programs such as Breakfast News, the 6 o'clock news, Holiday, and the unsolved crime appeal show Crime Watch. By this point, she was one of the most recognizable faces in the UK, and she was in the home of most families every day. In 1997, she won the BBC's Personality of the Year award and was frequently referred to as the Golden Girl of television. In the same year, she met Alan Farthing, who would later become her fiancé. The wedding was set for September 1999. However, in April of that year, everything would change, and the nation would be left reeling and in complete and utter shock. On the morning of April 26, 1999, 37-year-old Jill Dando left Alan's home in Chiswick. She walked around town for a while, visiting a few shops before leaving the shopping center alone just after 11 a.m. She then drove back to her house on Gowan Avenue in Fulham. She didn't regularly spend time at this house, as she was in the process of selling it and getting ready for her wedding to Alan. Just as Jill Dando reached the steps at 11:32 a.m., she went to put her keys in the front door and was ambushed from behind. She was pushed onto the ground and her face was pressed into the tiles of her front step. A single shot was fired into her left temple. She had no defensive injuries and it appeared she did not see her attacker coming. She was discovered about 14 minutes later by her neighbor, Helen Bailey. The front gate was firmly shut, and Helen knew she couldn't go past in case she contaminated the crime scene. She phoned 999, while another neighbor that had been alerted by Helen ran to a nearby doctor's surgery for help. Helen told the officers on the phone that she believed Jill was already dead. She initially thought she had been stabbed because of the amount of blood at the scene. Jill Dando reached Charing Cross Hospital at 12:30, where doctors and nurses fought tirelessly in an attempt to save her life. But tragically, she was declared dead at 1:03 p.m. Jill had been killed with a bullet from a 9mm caliber semi-automatic pistol. Further analysis showed that the gun had been pressed directly against her head. Her next-door neighbor, Richard, said he heard Jill cry out, but didn't hear a gunshot. He felt that the cry sounded more like a cry of surprise, as if she was greeting a friend or someone was playing a joke, rather than a cry of fear or something being wrong. When her neighbor Richard looked out of his window, he saw, unbeknownst to him, the killer, a white male with dark hair standing at around 6 foot tall, aged approximately 40 years old. He was quickly walking away from Jill Dando's house. Several other witnesses said they saw a smartly dressed man talking on a mobile phone hanging around outside of Jill's house for at least an hour before she returned home. Other people claimed to see a man fitting the same description running near a bus stop and walking across a road near Jill's house. This person, however, did not fit the description of the man seen walking away from the crime scene just seconds after she was shot. It remains unknown whether these people are linked, whether the witness that saw the man in the suit had seen the same person, and if the smartly dressed man or men bore any relevance to the case. Detective Chief Inspector Hamish Campbell was heading the investigation, and Jill Dando's death prompted the largest murder inquiry undertaken by the Metropolitan Police Force. The case was also the biggest criminal investigation since the Yorkshire Ripper, and it completely dominated the media. With no CCTV footage of her street, no DNA left by the killer, and the murder weapon being missing, the case would prove difficult from the beginning. The only piece of evidence left at the scene was the bullet that killed Jill Dando. Several theories were presented early on, some of which remain to this day, and some which were ultimately ruled out. Her handbag was still laying by her body with her mobile phone ringing inside. She was still clutching her house keys, and her jewelry and shopping were still there. The chances of it being a robbery did not seem likely. Some speculated that she had been shot and killed by an obsessed fan. Jill Dando was one of the most well-known public figures in the UK, and likely had numerous fans that were fixated with her. Nigel, Jill's brother, said that in the days leading up to her death, she had complained about a man who was, in her words, pestering her. But CCTV of her last known movements out shopping were carefully looked at, and there appeared to be no evidence of her being followed or watched by anyone, either on foot or by car. Another theory came off the back of her work with the TV show Crime Watch. Jill was one of the faces of the famous show that created reconstructions of unsolved crimes. Had she potentially solved a crime that had put someone in prison and ended up being killed as a result of it? Some argued it was possible that her killer was a hitman, potentially hired by someone who had been convicted as a result of Crime Watch. For the crew behind the show, it was a painful time appealing for information about one of their own. But just as the show had done for many others, they created a reconstruction that showed Jill's last movements. They also recreated the sightings of the mystery man or men near her house on the day she had been killed, complete with an E-fit. The theory of this being a professional hit as opposed to a random opportunist was further fueled by analysis of the position of the gun. It is thought that nobody heard the gunshot because the gun was so close to her head, and the position would have acted as a suppressor muffling the sound. The speed that it all happened, alongside the lack of evidence left at the scene and the angle that she was shot from, made many think it was a professional job. In the 6 months following on from Jill Dando's death, the police spoke to over 2,500 people. They tracked 1,200 cars and took over 1,000 statements. But despite their best efforts, little turned up. They seemed no closer to working out who had assassinated Jill Dando. The police were under immense pressure to solve the case. It wasn't just the family and friends of Jill that wanted answers. The public and the media wanted answers too. Jill Dando's funeral was held in May of 1999. Hundreds of people filled the streets to say goodbye and pay their respects to one of Britain's best-loved television presenters. It was clear from the outpouring of grief just how loved she was. She was buried next to her mother Winifred, who passed away in 1986. A year after Jill Dando was killed, police finally believed that they had a suspect. Barry George was a local man who lived around half a mile away from Jill's house. He had learning difficulties and an IQ of 75. When psychologists examined him, they concluded he had several different personality disorders: antisocial, histrionic, and narcissistic. Further assessment showed that he also had brain damage. The day after Jill was shot, he had been spotted acting suspiciously. He also had his own history with the law. He had been arrested several times for crimes such as posing as a policeman, and he had also been found on the grounds of Kensington Palace wearing a balaclava. He also had a string of assault charges against his name, so the police quickly mobilized and put him under surveillance. On the May 25, 2000, Barry George was arrested for the murder of Jill Dando, and he was charged with the crime several days later. His trial was held at the Old Bailey, and the prosecution's main piece of evidence was a microscopic particle of gunshot residue that had been found inside the pocket of one of Barry's coats. The gunshot residue matched the particles that were found at the scene. The coat also seemed to match the description of the smart clothing that had been seen on a potential suspect or suspects. On the July 1, 2000, Barry George was convicted by a majority of 10-1 and was sentenced to life in prison for the murder of Jill Dando. However, various professionals claimed he wasn't capable of committing a crime like that in such a seemingly experienced way due to his learning difficulties. They also said the evidence that the prosecution had put forward didn't stack up and came from inconsistent stories and statements. They argued Barry George had no motive and that the time frame of the events simply didn't link him to the case. An expert in gunshot residue said that the single particle could have come from a variety of sources and transferred from any number of places. Ultimately, his coat could have been contaminated, and determining where exactly the single particle came from was impossible. His lawyers immediately set out seeking an appeal, believing it to be a grave miscarriage of justice. In February 2001, Jill's co-presenter of Crime Watch, Nick Ross, and Jill's fiancé, Alan Farthing, began raising money to build an academic institute in her name. After successfully raising almost £1.5 million, University College London created the Jill Dando Institute of Security and Crime Science. It became the first university institute in the world to be devoted specifically to crime science. In the same year, the team from the BBC television show Ground Force designed a memorial garden in Jill's memory. It was full of her favorite colors and plants that were special to her. In February 2007, Western College opened a new university campus at the site of the former Sixth Form Center where Jill had studied. The Sixth Form building was named the Jill Dando Center. Barry George's defense team had been continuing to file appeals during these years, and in February 2007, after 2 unsuccessful attempts, the case was finally reviewed by the Court of Appeal. Sensationally, they overturned the guilty ruling made previously and set a new trial for June 2008. Except this time, the gunshot residue evidence was ruled inadmissible and was not allowed to be used due to expert opinions that had been previously presented. In February, Barry George was unanimously acquitted of the murder of Jill Dando. Several newspapers settled with him after he sought damages for articles that had been written about him. He didn't receive any compensation for his time in prison, as it was determined his innocence still hadn't been entirely proven. He now lives in Ireland, but the 8 years he spent inside and the unsolved case of Jill Dando still follows him. To this day, he remains the only person to be put on trial for her murder, and no new arrests have been made since. During Barry George's first trial, the defense put forward another theory as to what could have happened to Jill Dando. Just 3 days before she was shot, British and U.S. warplanes bombed the Radio Television Serbia building in Belgrade. The bombing killed 16 employees, and people wondered if Jill had been killed in retaliation. Just 3 weeks prior to her death, Jill had headed an appeal for the Kosovan Albanian refugees who were fleeing ethnic cleansing in the Balkans. Some people felt that her appeal for aid may have attracted the unwanted attention of Bosnian Serb hardliners, and she had been assassinated as a result. An opposition journalist had been murdered outside of his house in Belgrade before Jill had been killed. The method used in both cases was identical. Just 1 day after the murder of Jill Dando, Tony Hall, who was the BBC's head of news at the time, received a death threat from a man saying he was a Serbian activist. He claimed that he had killed Jill Dando and that Tony Hall would be next. However, the police strongly suspected that this call was nothing more than a hoax. It was determined that the British police never asked the Serbian police for their help, and no police officer ever traveled to Serbia to look into these claims. Ultimately, the police didn't think it was a credible theory. In February 2013, Jill's father, Jack Dando, sadly passed away without ever finding out who was responsible for his daughter's death. The case has remained relatively quiet since Barry George's release. But in February 2014, a new theory was presented. One of Jill Dando's former colleagues came forward and said that in the months leading up to her death, Jill had been working on exposing a pedophile ring involving some big and well-known names within the BBC. It is alleged that Jill gave a file over to the senior management in the mid-1990s, but the file was handed back to her, and an investigation was never carried out. A spokesperson for the BBC said there was nothing that substantiated these claims, and if there was, the allegations would have been looked into. Decades on, Jill's brother, Nigel, continues the search for answers, but knows that he and the police are up against a lot. He does, however, believe that some of the well-known theories can be ruled out. Nigel said he tends to think that it was not a professional hit that was taken out on Jill, nor does he think there is a Serbian connection. He believes that it was, in his words, simply a misguided individual that knew where Jill lived and was on her street at that time with a firearm. He also said he believes whoever this person was simply struck lucky. Sadly, he feels it is unlikely there will be any answers because of the passage of time. Although some detectives believe that the assassination of Jill Dando will likely never be solved, her family and friends have never given up hope that her killer will eventually be brought to justice. In December 2021, The name Harmony Montgomery first hit headlines across the United States of America when a missing persons investigation was launched to find the 7-year-old girl. Since then, her father and stepmother have both been arrested and charged. A home where she used to live in Manchester, New Hampshire has been searched for days on end, and the reward for information leading to her discovery has topped $140,000. But here's the strange thing. Before all of this, nobody seems to have set eyes on Harmony for more than 2 years. So who is Harmony Montgomery? Why did it take so long for anyone to notice that this little girl has gone missing? Where has she been at all this time? And is it now too late to save her life? Hi, and welcome to Mysterious 7. I'm Michael, and today I want to take you guys through the story of little Harmony Montgomery, who dropped off the face of the earth back in 2019. Little Harmony wasn't born under a lucky star. Both her parents have a problematic history of substance abuse, and she had to cope with a visual disability in one eye through all of that. Her mother, Crystal Sorey, a resident of Massachusetts, lost custody due to addiction problems when her daughter was just about 4 years old. Sorey had to surrender Harmony to the state in the summer of 2018. After that, the girl's father, Adam Montgomery, secured sole custody in February 2019 and moved her to New Hampshire. Harmony was living with her father, Adam, as well as his wife, Kaye Montgomery, and their children at the property at the time when she went missing. The little girl had been in and out of foster care for much of her life, according to her files. Sometimes kids do get caught up in the legal system for years at a time, but Harmony wasn't one of the kids who slipped through the cracks of the foster care system. She went missing from her own father's house, and he never reported the matter nor tried to reach out for help nor find his daughter. So what exactly is his involvement in the disappearance of his child? Police said they first became aware of the case when they received a call from the girl's mother, Crystal Sorey, in November 2021. She had been trying to locate her daughter for months, but said she had been blocked by her ex-husband from contacting her. She said she last saw her daughter during a FaceTime video call with Adam Montgomery around Easter 2019. Sorey told the police that since then, she unsuccessfully made attempts to find Harmony by contacting various schools and driving by addresses associated with Adam Montgomery. She said last year, he and his partner Kaye blocked all communication with her. According to news reports, Sorey had been sharing concerns over Harmony's well-being with Blair and Jonathan Miller, a couple who fostered and eventually adopted Harmony's younger brother, Jameson, in June 2019. The two were also actively trying to make a connection with Harmony and told Sorey multiple times they'd adopt her if the need arose. Harmony spent a lot of time in foster care with her younger biological brother, Jameson. It seems that the couple, who said they repeatedly told Harmony's mother that they were willing to adopt the girl if need be, was very much interested in the hunt or the missing child. The couple actively tried to make contact with Harmony throughout the past 2 years as they said Jameson missed her and that he'd cry at night for her. The couple said they weren't ever able to speak with Harmony and kept in touch with Sorey about her attempts to open a line of communication with the girl's father. On November 18, 2021, Sorey reported Harmony missing to the Manchester Police Department. Sorey made her first public appearance at the candlelight vigil on January 8th after authorities searched the last known residence of her daughter. Now this is where the timeline of events starts to get confusing, and that's typically the point in any investigation when you know someone has been lying. Mrs. Sorey told police she had not been able to contact her daughter since they spoke on a video call in April 2019. After that, she said Montgomery cut off all contact between her and her daughter, but Montgomery claimed to investigators he last saw his daughter around Thanksgiving 2019, claiming that Mrs. Sorey had picked up her from Manchester to take her to live with her. The criminal complaint says that Montgomery claimed to believe his daughter was living with his ex and did not show much emotion or reaction when officers said they were concerned whether Harmony was alive when they contacted him in December. This story was also contradicted by Kaye Montgomery's account, who said she last saw Harmony the day after Thanksgiving when her husband said he was driving her to see Mrs. Sorey. And in some additional testimony, Adam Montgomery's uncle, Kevin Montgomery, told investigators that he had not seen Harmony or his nephew since late 2019 when she was 5 years old. Police interviews with other family members revealed Montgomery was allegedly abusive toward his daughter, including giving her a black eye, forcing her to clean the toilet with her toothbrush and making her stand in a corner for hours as punishment. Montgomery's brother, Michael Montgomery, told investigators he had concerns that Adam was physically abusive to the child and was super short with her. Kevin Montgomery said he noticed Harmony had a black eye in July 2019, which his nephew confessed to causing by hitting her in the face, according to the criminal complaint. "I bashed her around this house," he said his nephew told him. Kevin said he contacted DCYF at that time, and he also noticed that his nephew subjected Harmony to other forms of abusive discipline, including scrubbing a toilet with her toothbrush and her being spanked hard on the butt. A neighbor said that it was a bad situation at the property, describing lots of people living there at different times, adults seen arguing in the street, junk left piled up in the yard, and the electricity is switched off at one point. The electricity was turned off, and they ran the generator all summer with the wiring running through the window. The neighbor said the Montgomerys were basically squatting at the home when it had fallen into foreclosure, and Mr. and Mrs. Montgomery were refusing to leave. "We didn't intermingle with them as it was a bad situation," she said. "There were lots of different people living there, piles of junk in the driveway, junk outside." She said she went away for the Thanksgiving holidays in 2019 and returned to find the family had finally packed up and moved out. And another neighbor on the street where Harmony lived also says that the family moved on Thanksgiving 2019, the same time Adam Montgomery says he last saw the missing child. Manchester police said definitively that Harmony has not been seen since around October or November 2019 when she was 5 years old. Yet a missing persons investigation was only launched in December 2021. Mrs. Sori has gone on public record to state that her daughter was failed by everybody. Despite multiple efforts to reach out to her daughter or at least find out more, no authorities concerned paid attention. And the girl's father clearly couldn't care less what happened to the child. The last confirmed sighting of Harmony by law enforcement was on the September 11th, 2019 when Manchester police officers were called to the home on 77 Guildford Street in Manchester where she lived. Police Chief Aldenberg, who is in charge of the case now, previously said the last police call up to the property was in October 2019, but confirmed he had muddled the dates in a press briefing on the January 12th. Despite the date change, the police chief said investigators are still working on the belief that Harmony was last seen in October or November of that year. Harmony's father and his wife were both arrested and charged on counts related to the missing child in early January. Adam Montgomery was arrested on the January 4th and charged with second-degree felony assault, 2 misdemeanor counts of endangering the welfare of a child, and 1 misdemeanor count of interference with custody. On the assault charge, he is accused of striking Harmony in the face sometime in July 2019, giving her a black eye according to the criminal complaint. Officials said Montgomery is not cooperating with the investigation into his daughter's disappearance, and he has refused to say where she is. The day after her husband's arrest, Kayla Montgomery was also arrested on 1 felony charge of welfare fraud for allegedly fraudulently collecting welfare benefits for the missing children between December 2019 and June 2021. Mrs. Montgomery, who has 3 children with her husband, is accused of obtaining $1,500 in food stamp benefits meant for Harmony between December 2019 and June 2021, even though the girl was not living with them. Prosecutors have now dropped that welfare fraud charge and added 3 new charges, 1 count of theft by deception and 2 misdemeanor charges of welfare fraud. The charges accuse Mrs. Montgomery of making intentionally false statements about her stepdaughter's whereabouts in February and March 2021 to claim benefits. After the police investigation into the case amped up, several disturbing details about Harmony's father came to light. Adam Montgomery has a history of violence and a long criminal record, including convictions for shooting a man in the head in a drug deal just 6 months before Harmony was born. He was also convicted in 2010 for attacking 2 women at gunpoint. It has emerged that Montgomery is a suspect in the cold case murder of a 28-year-old man in Lynn, New Hampshire back in February 2008. Darlene Guzman was found shot in the chest in the parking lot of the former White Hen convenience store in Lynn's Austin Square on the night of the February 10, 2008. He was pronounced dead at the hospital. A source in Boston law enforcement told reporters that Montgomery, who was 18 at the time, and 2 members of his family who were not named, had been the focus of the murder investigation since day one. The The three family members had been in contact with the victim earlier that day and planned to meet with him at the convenience store before the meeting culminated in gunfire, according to the source. The victim's car was later found abandoned in the direction of Bedford, New Hampshire, where Montgomery lived at the time. No one has ever been charged with Mr. Guzman's murder, but the source said Montgomery remains the focus of the investigation to this day. Almost 14 years on from that killing, Adam Montgomery and his wife are now charged on counts related to his missing daughter. However, while charged with serious offenses, including child abuse and welfare fraud, no charges have been brought against anyone directly in connection to Harmony's disappearance. So why was Harmony not reported missing for 2 years? Mrs. Sori has accused the authorities of failing her daughter. She said she made multiple attempts to report concerns to child services. After November 18th, when she contacted Manchester police saying she believed her daughter was missing, someone finally paid attention. Police officers contacted the New Hampshire Division for Children, Youth, and Families, or DCYF, about the location of the missing child. Then, on the December 27th, the DCYF reported that it was also unable to locate Harmony. Manchester police announced a search was launched on the December 31st. Emails sent by Mrs. Sori to the Manchester mayor's office begging for help in finding her daughter have also now come out. "Please, I'm begging for help in finding my daughter," she wrote on the December 29th. In her emails, Mrs. Sori said Adam Montgomery had never enrolled their daughter in school and that she has missed important doctor's appointments she's had since a baby due to a disability in her eye. The emails were sent just 2 days before police finally reported Harmony missing. As well as the repeated attempts to raise the alarm, the family was well known to child services. Newly released records released on the January 12th have emerged showing that police officers were called to the Guilford Street home at least 10 times between February 2019, when Montgomery got custody of Harmony, and when she was last seen in the fall. Reports ranged from claims of domestic disturbances to animal welfare and concerns about the living conditions in the home. The DCYF was notified about some of the incidents. New Hampshire Governor Chris Sununu announced on the January 12th that the DCYF is carrying out an internal review of its handling of Harmony's case. However, the governor defended the state's work, saying, "As soon as we found out that this child may not have been showing up for school for quite some time, it was reported up to us. The team got right on it. It wasn't a delay. It didn't sit in a file on somebody's desk." An independent investigation is also being carried out by the Massachusetts Office of the Child Advocate after Harmony was moved from Massachusetts into the custody of her father in New Hampshire in February 2019. Now officials in New Hampshire and Massachusetts are passing the blame between each other. The New Hampshire governor sent a letter to Massachusetts court officials slamming a judge for placing Harmony in the care of her monster father, giving his violent past and long rap sheet. Massachusetts Governor Charlie Baker responded to the criticism by saying he felt his pain, but said he wants to wait and see the results of the independent review by the Massachusetts Office of the Child Advocate. Investigators have revealed very few details about what they think may have happened to Harmony. The Guilford Street property has been a focus of much of the search, with investigators seen in the home and the backyard for multiple days. However, Manchester police said the search had concluded there. It is not clear if anything of interest was uncovered, and no other locations where searches have been identified. Chief Aldenburg insisted on the January 12th, but they are still working on the belief that Harmony is alive. However, he admitted that he was a little discouraged by the case so far and pleaded with the public to come forward with information. He added, "Somebody out there knows something." Despite the national attention and the painstaking efforts to find the missing child, investigators appear to have made very little headway. Though concerning, the lack of progress is perhaps unsurprising, as whoever has information about what happened to the little girl has had a more than a 2-year head start on the investigators. On the June 14th, 2022, law enforcement officials were seen transporting a refrigerator and taking potential pieces of evidence from the scene at a Manchester home where Harmony Montgomery's father and stepmother, Adam and Kayla, once lived. Former FBI agent Jennifer Coffindaffer stated that bringing in the refrigerator is usually used to maintain biological evidence. If they found a body or body parts in a freeze, law enforcement would want to maintain the level of decomposition. Coffindaffer said, "I have a really creepy feeling about this. It's not good." Several law enforcement agencies were seen outside the Union Street apartment complex where investigators were focused on the second-floor unit where Montgomery's father, Adam Montgomery, and his now estranged wife, Caleb, once lived. A woman called Darcy Hamilton, who lives behind the apartment complex, told a reporter that she briefly saw police enter the building on Monday, and it seemed casual. But by 9 a.m. Tuesday, Hamilton said she saw a full-scale investigation from her balcony, which included 6 to 7 officers behind the building at any given time. She added that she saw an individual in an FBI t-shirt and one man in a hazmat suit and noted that the front of the complex is a media circus. Investigators were later seen taking a refrigerator wrapped in biohazard tape from the apartment and loading it into a truck. A camera was also used to search the sewer in front of the building. "I knew about the case since 2021 when Harmony was initially reported missing. It's all over Manchester on signs and billboards," Hamilton said, "but I had no idea that her father had lived behind me." Noting that she has a 7-year-old daughter herself, Hamilton added that her heart is in my stomach right now thinking that something could have happened to that little girl here. After this raid, Crystal Sari stated publicly, "I know in my heart this is no longer a rescue mission. They're looking for a body." In a disturbing follow-up, Kelsey Small, one-time girlfriend of the father of missing Harmony Montgomery, was recently found dead in Manchester, police said. Small, 27, was with Adam Montgomery when police found the homeless couple sleeping in a car on December 31, 2021 in the early days of the search for Harmony. "The cause of death is still pending, but it does not appear suspicious," said police spokeswoman Heather Hamill. According to court records, police were on their 4th day of searching for Harmony when they found Adam Montgomery and Small sleeping in a car on New Year's Eve. The car was parked on Harville Street on the west side, close to the Gifford Street home where the Montgomery family had lived 2 years earlier. Small told police she had been romantically involved with Adam Montgomery for more than a year. She knew he had 4 children from previous relationships, but he was not in touch with any of them and never talked about Harmony, she told police. She had no idea where Harmony might be. Police eventually arrested Adam Montgomery, but never charged Small with any crime. So what happened to Harmony Montgomery, and where is she now? If her father is innocent, why did he never report her disappearance? And when her mother, Crystal, tried to find her daughter, why weren't police and the local child protective services on her side? As this case unfolds, we hope that Harmony's mother finds the justice she deserves, whether her daughter is dead or living. Police have stated that Harmony is 8, and she should be wearing glasses due to her blindness in one eye. It's a heartbreaking story, and we hope with everything we've got that somehow against all odds, Harmony Montgomery might still be found alive. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.